What if what we call public opinion was just a manufactured narrative that makes it easier to convince people that if their views are different, then there's something wrong with that, or there's something wrong with them?
Spending is a tax. As soon as the government spends money, eventually it's a tax. Sometimes we put a direct tax on the people, sometimes we borrow the money, and sometimes we print the money.
Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth.
The Patrick Riggins Show. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Yeah, some good old gravity kills to start off the last show of 2013. You're listening to one of the top, fastest growing shows on the radio today, the Patrick Riggins Show. And we're on one of the fastest growing and most active radio networks, the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network, providing a welcome beacon of light, a bright ray of freedom to all those lost ships at sea, a sure passage to the bay of personal liberty in an ocean fraught with rocks and reefs of government intrusion and control. We're broadcasting here from our home radio station in scenic and beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee, located in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. The radio station to which I'm referring is, of course, none other than News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Starting off the show, we put this story on Facebook this week, and I promised I'd talk about it. If you aren't hip to our Facebook page, it's located at facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. That's facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. You don't have to be a member of Facebook to view it either. Just type in that web address and you'll be able to read everything we post along with the links to the stories. This week, though, we had a judge rule that, hey, all this NSA spying is in fact constitutional and very much needed. This is the story from the CNN website. It ran on just about all the news websites, but that's the one I happened to grab.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. I have to admit it. It did surprise me a little bit, though it wasn't totally unexpected. I knew after the ruling against the NSA last week, and we'd probably have another judge that would rule in favor, if anything, just to force the issue to the Supreme Court. The story is a federal judge in New York ruled the NSA's bulk collection of data on nearly every phone call made in the United States was legal. In his ruling Friday, U.S. District Judge William Pauley said the NSA's bulk collection of phone records under Section 215 of the Patriot Act was legal. Quote, but the question of whether that program should be conducted is for the other two coordinate branches of government to decide, unquote, said the ruling by Pauley, an appointee of President Bill Clinton. So spying on the government in direct violation of the Constitution is legal. Clearly, this is a judge who has no respect for that document. If the government is doing something that isn't listed in the Constitution as being permitted to do, then it isn't constitutional and thus isn't legal. I don't care what little legal nuances you want to cram this NSA spying program through. It simply isn't mentioned in the Constitution as a power of the federal government. All this legal wrangling is jumping around the fact that we agree that the federal government is going to be bound by the Constitution. If it isn't, then why in the world do we bother even having that document? The American Civil Liberties Union, which brought the case, said it would appeal Pauley's ruling. Their quote is, we are extremely disappointed with this decision, which misinterprets the relevant statutes, understates the privacy implications of the government surveillance, and misapplies a narrow and outdated precedent to read away core constitutional protections. That's Jamil Jaffer, the ACLU's deputy legal director. Last week, U.S. District Judge Richard Leon said the NSA's bulk collection of metadata, phone records of the time and numbers called without any disclosure of content, that apparently violates privacy rights. His preliminary ruling favored 5 plaintiffs challenging the practice, but Leon limited the decision only to their cases. So only these 5 plaintiffs are having their constitutional rights violated? Now, I know, the case only involves them. But what's happened to our media? Where are they while all this is occurring? They should be roasting all these congressional representatives that voted for all this spying over a fire by now. A quote from Judge Leon, "I can't imagine a more indiscriminate and arbitrary invasion than this systematic and high-tech collection and retention of personal data on virtually every citizen for the purposes of querying and analyzing it without prior judicial approval." That was Judge Leon, an appointee of President George W. Bush. He also said, surely such a program infringes on, quote, that degree of privacy that the founders enshrined in the Fourth Amendment. We talked about this last week, but I'll briefly summarize for those who weren't in attention, or paying attention, or in attendance. Judge Leon's ruling said the plaintiffs in this case have also shown a strong likelihood of success on the merits of a Fourth Amendment claim, adding, as such, they too have adequately demonstrated irreparable injury. Leon also noted the government, quote, does not cite a single instance in which analysis of the NSA's bulk metadata collection actually stopped an imminent attack or otherwise aided the government in achieving any objective that was time-sensitive in nature. However, he put off enforcing his order, barring the government from collecting the information, pending an appeal by the government. So when an activity is found to be probably unconstitutional, the judge ruling, and that's what he found last week, that Judge Leon ruling issues a stay in order to give the government time to appeal. Not cease and desist collecting this metadata, and then later if it's found constitutional, well, then it can continue. If something is probably violating the Constitution, and thus harm is being done in this judge's opinion, then shouldn't that activity be stopped until it can be found out whether or not it's legal? When this latest judge made this ruling, Judge Pauley this week, saying this spying was constitutional, I didn't see him going the other way and saying, well, I don't think it's unconstitutional, so I'm going to rule in favor of the government, but I'm going to direct the government to stop spying until the plaintiffs get a chance to appeal. No, you see, the government always gets a pass. The government never has to do with less. It's always us, the citizens, the people in charge. And in case you've forgotten, we're the ones in charge of this country, not the government. It's about time we start acting like owners of this country instead of meek little serfs begging for scraps of freedom from our master's table. Here's something I want you to remember through all of this. Despite what you were taught in school, the Supreme Court is not the final arbiter of what's constitutional or not. The people of this country are. We decide what's constitutional or not. If you want to listen to a whole segment on that, go back to our YouTube archives at youtube.com/Patrick Riggin Show. Go back to the October 5th, 2013 show, October 5th, 2013, and look for the segment. It's entitled, Who Determines What's Constitutional? It was the third segment of the show that week, but just look for that title. You'll see it right off when you get to that show, October 5th of this year. The whole segment has some good information, but I'll pull a quote from Thomas Jefferson that I used during that part of the show. Mr. Jefferson stated, quote, to consider the judges as ultimate arbiters of the constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed. Now, he also wrote, but the opinion which gives the judges to the right to decide what laws are constitutional and what not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislature and executive also in their spheres, would make a judiciary a despotic branch. What he's saying is that putting the Supreme Court at the top of the hierarchy for determining what is constitutional or not would, in essence, make the Supreme Court a dictator, a ruler over the people of this nation, which the Constitution doesn't allow. You've probably never been told this either, other than on this show. The Constitution does not say the Supreme Court is the final say on what is constitutional or not. And do you know why it doesn't? because the citizens of this country are the final say. We created the government. We are over it. We are the boss. Therefore, since we're ultimately in charge, then we ultimately have the final say on what is constitutional and what isn't. Remember, all the powers not mentioned in the Constitution are reserved to the states and ultimately to the people. It's time for our first break of this much too short hour. This week, we'll get into the government's revolving door. We'll talk about just how advanced America really is and how not to end sentences with a preposition and a whole lot more here on the Patrick Riggins Show and the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. Oh, yeah. I don't think Beautiful Girls would replace Freedom, but it might be close. It might make it tolerable if you didn't have freedom and liberty. Welcome back to the second segment of the Patrick Riggins Show. The one show that guides you through the jungle of government intrusion, tyranny. We clear through all of that with the machete of truth and freedom. Two indispensable provisions that are becoming increasingly rare in the country today. You're listening to us here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. What I want to talk about this segment is what is referred to as the revolving door between government and business. I have a few points to make this segment, so I'll try to work through them as quickly as possible to get everything in before this half-hour break. This revolving door is one of the signs that our government has too much influence in this country. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be free to take a government job and then take a private sector job or vice versa. I don't have any problem with that at all. What I'm pointing out is what we can learn from the observations of this occurring almost on a daily basis. Why would a company reward an employee for jumping ship and getting a job in the federal government? Did you even know that they did this? That employees were given bonuses and stock options as a reward for quitting their company and joining the federal workforce. Most people who haven't been on the inside of government don't know this is fairly standard policy. For instance, in February of this year, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew received an exit package worth over $1 million from Citigroup shortly before joining the Obama administration. Did you know that Mr. Lew's contract with Citigroup made explicitly clear that his eligibility for a special bonus was contingent on his securing a, quote, full-time, high-level position with the U.S. government or regulatory body? A story ran in The Nation back in May addressing this very type of thing. Here's what it said. Recent disclosures and employment agreements reviewed by The Nation show that current leadership staff to both Democratic and Republican lawmakers have received six-figure bonuses and other incentive pay from corporate firms shortly before taking jobs in Congress. In many cases, these staffers are well positioned to influence multi-billion-dollar legislation on issues ranging from tax policy to defense and which impact their previous employers. Robert Walker, an attorney and former chief counsel to both the House and Senate ethics committees, stated that ethics rules authorize congressional staffers to receive bonuses from prior employers as long as the money is being paid for work previously performed. Such bonuses and other financial awards are ostensibly allowed so long as they are, quote, not been enhanced because of the individual's congressional employment, unquote. The Nation goes on to write, though, but it is almost impossible to discern the circumstances under which a lobbying firm or corporation gives bonuses to departing employees who take powerful political positions. Such information is closely guarded, and none of the employers were willing to share this type of information. Are you starting to understand why I say over and over there is no discernible difference between the Republican and the Democratic parties. That it's one big pro-government party, and we, the taxpayers, we're the ones picking up the tab. This column went on to say, congressional staffers can earn as much as $170,000 as a federal employee, but such pay pales in comparison to what many have come to expect on K Street, that's in Washington, where top lobbyists earn several million a year. The bonuses, which cut across industries from defense contracting to broadcasting, and which can amount to several $100,000, help staffers to maintain the fixed costs associated with a lobbyist lifestyle. In other words, they need lots of money to pay off congressional representatives. It's not called that, of course. It's called fact-finding trips or issue conferences. Did you also notice how all these types of things seem to occur in Las Vegas or California or Hawaii or Florida? There's a real good reason for that, you know. The column goes on to say, it strains common sense that when employers are giving employees who are about to enter government work these huge bonuses, that there isn't a hope that there will be influence and access. That was Jessica Levinson, a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. She compared the bonuses to how special interests seek access to politicians using campaign donations. Quote, I think the main gist of the payment is the same, she notes. It's, quote, I hope when I'm pushing a piece of legislation, you'll remember me with fondness. In early April, President Obama released his budget proposal, which reflected calls by military leaders asking for contracts with defense behemoth Northrop Grumman to be cut or cut back. Among them was the Global Hawk, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle used to gather intelligence, which the Air Force has complained is not only too expensive but unnecessary, since traditionally manned U-2 flights adequately serve its surveillance needs. But lawmakers on both House and Senate Armed Services Committees have pushed back, demanding funding for the Global Hawk. The demand to restore funding to the Northrop Grumman drone comes at a time when the company has employed at least 20 former congressional staffers as lobbyists. In addition, Northrop Grumman has former lobbyists running the two major committees. In January, Ambrose Bruce Hawk was hired by Senator Jim Inhofe, a Republican of Oklahoma, as a staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, where Inhofe recently became ranking member. Hawk, a former Northrop Grumman executive and lobbyist, received up to $450,000 in bonus and incentive pay from Northrop Grumman in March, according to disclosures filed with the Ethics Committee. And apparently he's not alone. The story says, on the other side of Capitol Hill, a senior staffer for the House Armed Services Committee who worked for Northrop Grumman as a lobbyist, Thomas McKenzie, received a similar bonus and severance pay worth $498,334 before assuming his position in 2011. In remarks on the Senate floor, Inhofe has cited the Global Hawk as an example of how President Obama wants to gut our military. Interestingly, Northrop Grumman's employment policy, as stated in its February 8K filing, which is not what a lot of people read. Most people read the annual report, but this was in the 8K filing. It encourages employees, this is from their employment policy, quote, it encourages employees to take positions in government by providing special financial incentives to those who leave to become public servants, unquote. It stipulates that when employees retire due to government service, they have the privilege to vest stock options that would ordinarily be paid out over time. The Nation reached Randy Belote, Northrop Grumman vice president for strategic communications. They talked to him and asked him about this former employee, Tom McKenzie, who's now working at the House Armed Services Committee. Their official statement was he had left when his position was eliminated and received, quote, customary severance compensation. The company, however, would not comment on McKenzie's bonus, which, according to disclosures, came in addition to severance pay, or the bonus awarded to Bruce Hawk. Asked if Northrop Grumman has met with its former staffers now leading the House and Senate Armed Services Committees to discuss defense policy or certain weapons programs, the nation was told, quote, Northrop Grumman has a long-standing policy that we do not comment on meetings or conversations held with government representatives. And the nation asked, what about the government contract? Were the bonuses related to the decision by the two former executives to enter the government work? Company said, we don't have any further comment. Thanks. So am I railing against people getting jobs in government? No. Am I railing against people going from private industry to government? No, not that either. The point I want you to take away from this is if the government didn't have so much power and money, this would be a non-issue. But the Republicans and the Democrats have both ceased working towards the good of this country and are now working for the good of themselves. Well, unfortunately, the half-hour break has arrived. Hey, stay with us through the bottom of the hour here, because when we return, I have some good stuff on just how advanced our country has become. How it's becoming one of the civilizations that will be labeled kind and good. All that and more when we come back here on the Patrick Regan Show and the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network.
Somewhere they're speaking, it's already coming in.
Hey, we're back for the second half hour of the action-packed show this week. You're listening to one of the fastest growing, most logical and reasoned radio shows being broadcast today. This is the Patrick Regan Show live. Yes, live, not recorded. Live here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. We're also being broadcast locally from our home base here in Knoxville, Tennessee on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Just kind of jumping on into the segment here. One quick note I want to make real quick, one quick note I want to make quickly is that a lot of the flu's been going around and a lot of people are sick. A lot of my friends are sick. So I wanted to play them a little thing here just for everyone out there that's sick.
I heard that you were feeling ill, headache, fever, and a chill. I came to help restore your pluck, 'cause I'm the nurse who likes to...
Hey, there we go.
Gotta love Ferris Bueller.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That's for everyone out there in bed. All right. Have you ever thought about just how much our government divides this country? This is the problem with government sorting people into different groups and not treating everyone equally. We have all these groups that are fighting for their piece of the government money pie. They want special treatment and all the perks and dividends that come with it. So you see, it pays for everyone to try and identify as a member of a group, of a minority, if you will. It pays for someone to be in one of these groups because it brings with it special perks and recognition and privileges that aren't afforded others, such as employment, freer speech rights, as well as money and access. So we have these people who are self-identifying themselves as part of these groups in order to curry favor from the government and businesses and society in general. And these groups aren't achievement-oriented groups. They're victim advocacy groups. If they were achievement-oriented, then they wouldn't be looking for special favors or money. They'd be promoting people's achievements based on their individual initiative. Don't confuse this concept with something like the, quote, achievement awards given by these victims groups and organizations. They aren't to celebrate individual achievement so much as to celebrate the achievement of a member of their group. This person isn't a high-achieving American or even human. They are a high-achieving member of their group. In order to get more members of this particular group and get them to achieve, we need even more special privileges and grant money to accomplish this goal. And the government's more than happy to encourage this sort of behavior. In fact, it practically mandates it. The reason is because it's easier to pit one group against another while the government goes along its merry way of violating everyone's rights. Hey, you old elderly people, those young voters are trying to take away your Medicare and Social Security benefits. And you younger minorities, these limited government people are trying to take away your right to vote. Just look at what happens when a pro-government group gets together versus a pro-individual group. When minorities overwhelmingly vote for the Democrat Party, that's just better participation of normally oppressed groups of people. When the Tea Party votes in pro-individual and limited government candidates, well, then America is in crisis. Heck, even the Republican establishment doesn't like Tea Party people because they're not all on the government solutions bandwagon. This is part of the problem I was talking about during the last segment, this whole revolving door between businesses and government. People get all mad about that. Businesses are getting special tax breaks. Businesses are getting sweetheart loans and grants from the government. Lobbyists are getting their clients special exemptions and treatment from Congress and the government in general. Most people don't agree with that practice, but then it turns out almost 50% of Americans are on some sort of government aid or subsidy. 50%. But if a company is getting special treatment, oh, well, we've got to stop that. But I want my special treatment and money that comes to me for being part of a special group of people in this country. Don't you dare talk about cutting any of that back. If you do, you're a racist or a sexist or a homophobe, whatever we have to call you, to make you back off my special government money and privileges. It just proves that old axiom. Either there needs to be less government corruption or I need to be a bigger part of it. Unfortunately, most people are wanting to participate in that second part. They don't mind corruption and constitutional violations as long as they're getting theirs. All these people screaming about corporate welfare, but then turn around and demand their own welfare or subsidy. It's this kind of hypocrisy that I rail against on this show week after week. And both sides are guilty of it. Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, they all want to use government to benefit their ideas and causes. They want to use government to force others to live in a way that they think is correct. No matter whether or not you might happen to agree with them. Doesn't matter. They think they know better, so you have to live with it. Look, all government aid is the receiving of stolen property. Government takes money at the point of a gun. If you don't believe that, just don't pay your taxes and see who the IRS sends over to talk to you. After that, if you still refuse to give your money to the government so that they can give it to someone else in the form of charity, then it will confiscate your property by force, no questions asked. But the government forcibly takes this money from you and gives it to someone else. You do that, and it's robbery, a form of stealing. If I pulled out a gun and took any amount of money from you, even if I was using it to buy groceries for someone else, it's still armed robbery. But when the government does it, well, that's just taxes, and you owe that other person receiving that government aid anyway. Now, what kind of country allows that? I love throwing that argument back up in people's faces who tell me that Obamacare is constitutional and right. They'll say, what kind of country doesn't provide medical care for its citizens? Or all advanced societies and countries give medical care to their people. I immediately ask them, what kind of country takes money at the point of a gun, essentially robbing its own citizens, only to hand that money over to someone who didn't earn it? What kind of advanced society condones stealing and the mandatory forcing of one citizen to pay the bills of another? That's an outright lawless society that would allow that sort of thing to occur, is it not? That's not an advanced country. That's tyranny. That's what dictators and kings do. That's all we've had mostly throughout history. Royalty, or what claims to be royalty, taking money from the people making it. We look down on a king or leader who steals from his or her own people in order to enrich themselves and their cronies. But if they steal money, put most of it in their pockets, but spread a little bit around to the people who didn't earn it, well, then that's okay? What kind of psychopathic person would say that's the hallmark of an advanced civilization? Advanced civilizations respect individual rights. And one of the most important ones is to be able to keep what you earned. You earned it, so you can keep it. You aren't entitled to what someone else has earned. How can you make that argument? You can't. Advanced civilizations don't provide medical care at the expense of someone else. They don't make one person pay the bills of another person. That's what occurs in backward civilizations. As I just pointed out, if the king makes you pay his bills, that's wrong. But if the king makes you pay his bills and some of your fellow countrymen's, all of a sudden now that's okay? What kind of crazy reasoning is that? Our country was the anomaly. Our country was the one that started out with freedom and liberty. It said if you earn a good living, you are free to enjoy the perks that come with it. You didn't owe the king money. You didn't owe your neighbor part of your earnings. It was yours. That's what made this country great. Not government, freedom and liberty. Other countries had governments, but weren't anywhere as successful as we've been in. So it isn't government that did it. It was freedom. That's the key variable we had and they didn't. Oh, dang it. I'm out of time for this segment. Let's take a break, and I'll decide if I want to wrap this up in the next short segment, if we'll cover something else here. That's the problem with only having an hour every week. There's a lot of stuff I just don't have time to get to, but we'll try after the break here on the Patrick Riggins Show and the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. Hey, we're back. Sorting paperwork. We're here on the Patrick Riggins Show on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Oh, I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do this last segment. I do want to get to this, and it's kind of a personal thing. Right here at the end of the show, this is the last show of 2013, and I wanted to take a minute to thank all you listeners out there for your just incredible, loyal, and undying support. I am absolutely amazed and, humbled by the strides this radio show has made this year. And it's all due to you. Sure, I sit here and talk, but without you listening, it wouldn't matter. For all you new listeners who don't know, we weren't always on this radio station. And when we came over to this one back in the spring, we had, right around 100 people following us on Facebook. That's probably about right for a little 1-hour show only being broadcast on Saturday afternoons. But since May of this year, when we came over, we've gone from that initial 100 or so to almost 19,500 people. 19,500. And at the rate this radio show is growing, we'll be over 20,000 before the end of this week or the end of this next week. And we're still a 1-hour show being broadcast on Saturday afternoons on an 8,000-watt radio station. I mentioned this piece of trivia last week. To put that in perspective, they are 24-hour-a-day popular music radio stations running 100,000 watts who only have 2,000 or so followers. And we have popular talk show hosts that run 3 hours a day, 5 days a week who aren't pulling over 1,800. And this show has over 10 times that number. And we've been on for less time and only once a week. Can you imagine what's going to happen in 2014? We're currently working to get this show on as many radio stations as we can nationwide. And not to make tons of money. That'd be nice, but that's not why I started this show. I started this show because this message of freedom and liberty for every human being wasn't being explained. It wasn't being talked about. Oh, sure, it was mentioned from time to time in passing, but no radio or television show host made this a central point of the show, not like we do here. I think a lot of Americans are becoming tired of being used by the political process that is dominated by people who don't have our best interests at heart. They are in it to get as much for themselves and their friends as they can. And I think a lot of people are getting tired of that. Tired of having their tax money going to pay for someone else's good time, whether it be the people in Congress or the bureaucrats in government or our fellow citizens who demand a portion of our hard-earned money. People are tired of being forced to pay the way for someone else. They're tired of having our soldiers deployed around the world. They're tired of our government murdering innocent people in other countries. They want what we used to represent, a nation governed by the people with freedom and liberty for all. Not just Americans, but anyone who wants to come to this country and experience the American dream. And that's what this show is working towards. An America where, once again, the oppressed people of the world can look to for an example of freedom from tyranny and governmental control, a goal after which to model their country. or a personal goal to arrive at our shores and experience firsthand their first breaths of personal freedom and liberty. That's where we need to return our country. It isn't going to happen, though, if all you do is listen to this show. You're going to have to take an active role in taking our country back from those who are seeking either to ruin it or drain it of all of our resources in order to enrich themselves at the expense of the people. So together in 2014, which is a big election year, we're going to have to work harder than ever before to educate and persuade our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, everyone. We're going to have to work to get them educated and to the polls. And that's just half the battle, though. The other half is running good candidates for office. It doesn't matter if we have all the votes in the world if we don't have anyone for which to vote. It isn't that hard to run for office, and with a good support group, it's even easier. But it does take a little initiative on your part in convincing yourself or one of your friends or neighbors to run. As I've said many times on this show, you know someone who would make an excellent candidate for office. It might even be you. The only thing left to do is to get them to run. And if they're a freedom and liberty loving person, let me know. I'll put them on the show. I'll give them the whole hour if that's what it takes. The point is, in 2014, get active in helping to run this country. The people who want to take it from you are already active. They're already making plans on how to push it further out of your reach. The longer you wait, the worse it's going to get, and the harder it will be to take our country back. We're out of time this week. If you want more information about us, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Patrick Riggin Show, facebook.com/Patrick Riggin Show. Also, you can go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Patrick Riggin Show. That's where all the archive shows are. And you can also email us, patrickriggenshow@gmail.com, or drop us a Carter letter to WOKI here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Remember, liberty begins with you in your mind. Happy New Year to everyone. And as always, join me next Saturday afternoon at 4, where we'll be fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Again, Happy New Year. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
As a dreamer dreams in a trap.
Red Dozen. Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on the Patrick Riggin Show. Be there.